Okay, we're recording.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the July 27th, 2022 Planning Commission regular meeting. It is now 6:05 p.m. and this Planning Commission meeting is now in session. My name is Dan Hubble. I am the Planning Commission Chair. Tonight's virtual Planning Commission meeting is being brought to you using video conferencing technology provided by Zoom. The Zoom video of this meeting is being broadcast live and will be updated to the city's YouTube channel at the end of the meeting. Deputy CPD Director Allison Van Gorp and other staff members are participating in tonight's meeting remotely as well. Public audience members may be listening to the meeting by telephone, using Zoom, or by joining in person at the Mercer Island Community and Event Center. So those of you that are joining us in one of those forms, welcome to all of you and thank you for joining us this evening. The first item, we will take the roll. So commissioners, if you could please have your microphones turned on, and we will have, is it Allison, you'll be taking the roll this evening?
Yep. Okay, Vice Chair Murphy.
Present.
Commissioner Boatsman.
Present.
Commissioner Rashis.
Here.
Commissioner Curry.
Here.
Commissioner Ragheb.
Present.
Chair Hubble.
Present.
And Commissioner Accuse is absent.
Thank you very much. We do have a quorum for the meeting, so we will be continuing this evening. As I mentioned earlier, for this meeting, we are using the Zoom platform. As with all of our previous meetings, I will do my best to recognize you in the order that you have asked to be recognized in, and hands are raised. Please feel free to use the virtual hand raise tool, or if you need to get my attention, you can also wave your hand. That might catch my attention quicker if for some reason I'm glancing away from the screen. The first item on the agenda this evening, and actually before we do this, I just wanted to say I apologize. I was not at the last meeting, and I know we have a couple of new members. So for Adam and Michael, I haven't met you in person, so it's nice to meet you both, and glad to have you here on the team. And as I joked before we joined the meeting, it's my absence last time is a great example, and you better show up, otherwise you're going to draw the short straw. And so thank you all for your support and confidence in having me run these meetings. I don't know if that's, I'm assuming it's a positive sign, so thank you very much. So anyhow, Michael and Adam, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and hopefully we'll get a chance, now that I'm back from vacation, to meet in person and connect. So with that, I will then go to the first item on our agenda, which is appearances. This is the opportunity for anyone to speak to the commission on any item. I understand, Allison, that we have one person online that would like to address the commission.
That's correct. We have one speaker, Amy Lavin, and I am promoting her right now. Amy, once you have the option, go ahead and turn on your camera and microphone.
Hello, everybody.
Hello, Amy. Good.
All righty.
Good to see you again. And just as you always know, if you could please just state your name for the record, and we'll have 3 minutes for you.
All righty. Thank you. My name is Amy Lavin. I am a resident on Mercer Island, have been for about 36 years. I also serve as the CEO of the Strom Jewish Community Center here on the island. And I wanted to just thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak tonight. So here's my prepared statement, and it's nice to see many of you after a long time away. Thank you for the chance to review the land use element of the comprehensive plan. We wanted to suggest a minor change to the comprehensive plan language that would better support the excellent institutional uses that the island has in single family zones today. As you know, when the city redid its single family zoning a few years ago, it did not necessarily consider the future needs of the institutions that currently exist on the island. For the youngest in the community to those with the greatest wisdom and experience, The Strom Jewish Community Center has been the hub for recreation, play, entertainment, cultural enrichment, Jewish holidays, and traditions and meaningful friendships that have sustained us here on Mercer Island for 53 years. The JCC is in a single-family residential zone, and we need to completely remodel the building. Our building does not fit the needs of the community today, and our systems are aging, in some cases past their useful lives. A very timely example of that is the antiquated air conditioning system that we are dealing with this week in this particular heat wave. And in order to get the permits we need to update our systems like the AC or to remodel our facilities and make them ADA compliant, we will have to seek multiple variances which are disfavored under the code. We know that the Planning Commission supports the J and the many cultural institutions on the island. The Planning Commission wants to see these uses thrive. These uses are what make life on the island so unique. We suggest that the comprehensive plan language be strengthened to reflect the city's support for these institutions, so there is no doubt that the city wants institutions to be able to modernize and thrive to meet the changing needs of the community. As a result, we suggest some minor changes to the comp plan that reflect this type of support. Specifically, in section 17.4, it currently reads that social and recreation clubs, schools, and religious institutions are predominantly located in single-family residential areas of the island. It now reads that development regulation should reflect the desire, and we would recommend or request that you consider, I should say, changing should reflect to shall support the desire to modernize and retain viable and healthy social, recreational, educational, and religious organizations as community assets, which are essential for the mental, physical, and spiritual health of Mercer Island. And thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Amy. You mentioned that those were prepared comments. Is that something that you could email to Allison so that we have a written copy of all of those? So that I was trying to take notes, but I know I missed a lot of it. So
I'm reading and happy to share the copy in front of me. So
Excellent.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Amy. It's been great to see you again.
Likewise, have a good evening.
Yeah. Allison, were there any other?
No, Chair, that was our only speaker tonight.
Great. With that, we will move on from public appearances and move to our first item of regular business, which will be the approval of the minutes from June the 29th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Rashish and seconded by Commissioner Boatsman. Are there any corrections, comments, or items of discussion related to the minutes? All right. Excuse me. Hearing none, the motion on the table is to approve the minutes of June the 29th. Allison, would you like to call a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Commissioner Boatsman,
Yes.
Commissioner Rashis,
I'm.
Vice Chair Murphy,
Aye.
Commissioner Curry,
Aye.
Chair Hubble,
I'll abstain. I was not here.
and Commissioner Ragheb.
Aye.
All right.
Did you get Commissioner Curry? Okay, all right. I missed that.
So the minutes pass 5-0-1. All right. With that, we will move to, thank you everyone, to the second item on our agenda, which is related to our comprehensive plan update. As we've been, were first introduced to back in May, I believe, at least the overall view on our agenda for this to take the course of the year. So we will move to, I believe, Adam, you have a guest with us to discuss the transportation element and the first draft as it was presented.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm Adam Zach, Senior Planner with CPD. This is the first element that you'll be looking at, the first briefing on an element that you'll be looking at as part of our comprehensive plan update, our periodic review as required by GMA. Tonight we have John Davies from KPG, the consulting firm that's helped us prepare this draft of the transportation element. And then also joining us is Patrick Yamashita from Public Works, if we have any technical questions that he can help us out with. So with that, I will turn it over to John to walk you through the element.
Welcome, John.
Okay. Let's just see if I can. Okay. Hopefully you see a presentation up on your screen there. Not yet. Oh, there's a share button. How about that?
We see it.
Okay. You do see it now.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
we see the presenter view.
Oh, you do. Well, we can just
Yep, there you go.
we can do that. How about that?
Perfect.
There we go.
Okay. So one of the things Adam asked me to do was, since this is the first element that the Planning Commission is seeing, is just give you a little bit of a overview, just to kind of get you up to speed on what a transportation element is and how it relates to the comprehensive plan. So back in 1990, the state passed the Growth Management Act, and the idea was for fast-growing cities and counties to develop comprehensive plans to identify how they'll really accommodate that future growth in population and jobs. So there is a requirement every 10 years that the comprehensive plan and all its elements need to get updated. So transportation element is one of the mandatory elements of the comprehensive plan. The other ones are land use, housing, utilities, and capital facilities, I believe. So everything really relates back to land use, and as well as the transportation element does as well. So what a transportation element does is it uses the land use data, it puts it into a travel demand model, which will forecast the amount of traffic growth that we're expected to see. We compare that traffic growth on the streets to see how those compare to a level of service standard that is established. I believe it's your goal number 10 or in your transportation element. And by doing that, we look for deficiencies and we look at how we can correct those deficiencies by developing a project list. We also add to that project list things that are important for the community, such as non-motorized facilities, such as sidewalks or bicycle facilities. So those are also added into it. And from that, the transportation element is developed. So we did a transportation element, and I've actually been involved with Mercer Island on the transportation element since 2014. And we did an update in 2018, partially because the light rail station was now becoming a thing that we're going to have to contend with. And part of that was to kind of focus in on the mitigation that the station might need to have in terms of the town center and some of the streets and intersections around there. So this time around, we had a discussion with staff, and we need to get our comprehensive plan done by December 2024. But we kind of are at a strange point in reality. One is we're still in the midst of a pandemic. We have to go and collect our traffic data pretty much now to be able to meet the 2024 deadline. We've got a lot of people working from home. We've got a light rail station that's supposed to open in 2024 now. And we did a comparison as part of our analysis, and we really don't have that much traffic growth to contend with on the island. Basically, if we look at 2022 and 2018, those traffic volumes that we did, and when we actually collected, I don't remember how many off the top of my head, but certainly multiple, I think 26 is coming to mind, intersections throughout the island. We collected all that data, but we haven't seen that much growth on the island. So there isn't really that kind of growth need that we're kind of going, wow, we got to go and update it. So we were contracted by the city to complete more of a light update or a strategic update of the transportation element. And I'll get a little bit more of what I mean by that. So then we'll then be able to do more significant update in 2026, once we've got light rail on Mercer Island, open, functioning. We'll see all our counts are going to reflect that event happening. And also, hopefully we'll know what our new normal is in terms of either people working at home or returning to offices and commuting all over the place. So to get into what we updated this time around is we looked at we changed our planning horizon year from 2035, which is where we were at in the 2018 update, to 2044.
John, sorry, can I break in 1 second? There was a hand from Commissioner Rishisha. Just want to make sure before we moved on, we address.
Thanks. Can you go back a slide?
Sure. Maybe. Okay.
So I didn't quite follow the explanation. Here's what I took away from your explanation. Tell me if I'm not understanding this properly. Not much has changed since 2018, and we expect significant change in 2026, post-pandemic and post-light rail. So I'm not following the logic of why we're updating now.
We need to have the update done by basically regulation by 2024.
But I thought it was 10 years. So I count 2018.
We did an update in 2018, but our last full update was in 2014. So that's the 10 years. And how this actually works is it's in the RCW, what year every county has to do an update. And 2024 is King County's update year.
Got it.
Okay.
And then how are we defining a light update?
So I'm going to get to that.
Okay, that's fine.
Next. So,
okay. All right. Thank you.
So we did go and we updated our planning horizon year to 2044. One of the things we did was King County in 2021 has adopted the countywide planning policies, and our transportation element has to be consistent, and actually the full comprehensive plan has to be consistent with those policies. So this is an opportunity to update those. We updated all of our text and graphics to reflect conditions that have changed since 2018. For example, projects get constructed and we're now showing those as being done. And then we revised the project list. And more importantly, we revised the project list and the cost estimates that go along with that project list. I'm not sure if everyone's aware, but the cost of things such as concrete and asphalt have gone up almost astronomically. And so therefore, having those updated cost estimates really will help us when we're going after a grant or being able to identify how much a certain improvement's going to cost, that we know that we can pay for this project and the project list. So that was really one of the emphasis areas, was to get that project list together and the cost estimates. Speaking of the project list, and one of the things I will do is I'm going to walk you guys real quickly through the material that we've sent over to you that we want you to review. So we'll probably see a few things, and there may be a couple of questions that come out as we get into this later on. But to give you the overview, there's a 20 years of recommended improvements. It's approximately $60 million of those 20 years of improvements. Those improvements include 18 non-motorized projects, 6 improvements at intersections, 2 roadway projects, and the street preservation and maintenance, which is actually a very big portion of that $60 million, is really just going out there and getting the streets fixed. There's a lot of mileage in Mercer Island, and there's some areas that are challenging from a maintenance standpoint. So that's part of the reason why those dollars are in there. One of the things we found in our analysis is that the transportation funds that the city has is sufficient to be able to maintain and improve its transportation system over the 20 years. So you're not in a position where you're going to have to cut back the number of projects that you want to complete because you don't have adequate funding. Okay, so just to give you sort of the last bit here, there is a review process that we want to be able to follow here. We want to go through a review by the Planning Commission of the transportation element, and we're asking that the commissioners provide written comments by August 31st, 2022. And really 2 areas we want you to be thinking about. One is any kind of feedback on the transportation element update, things that you think should be changed or corrected. And then the other element is things that you really want a little bit more information in order that you can form a recommendation to move forward on this transportation element. And then in September, we'll get back together and we can then discuss any kind of questions based on your written comments, and we'll be able to handle some of those discussions at that meeting. So do you have any questions at this point, or I can just sort of jump into a little bit of what you're going to be looking at.
If we, John, let me
Sure.
pause you for a second there. Excuse me. So just for clarity for the commission for this evening, and I see a couple of hands. Tonight, feel free to ask questions about any of the pieces that you saw here in the packet for clarity, obviously on the process. For Allison and Adam, the September 28th meeting. So based on the questions from here and any additional feedback that we would submit, it sounds like the September 28th meeting is when we would have sort of a second discussion. I'm assuming from that is where you will build what I'll call sort of a final draft that would eventually go to a hearing. And then I forget, was the plan that we're going to vote on all of these elements sort of at the end of this process, farther down the line?
Yes. Thanks for bringing that up. I think that's a good point. So for tonight, we're just going to walk you through what changes we proposed, and we don't necessarily want to get into wordsmithing today. We'll just have John kind of walk through what we're proposing, and then if you have proposed changes or whatever, we're asking for those in written form by the 31st. And then in September, we'll walk through those written comments that we received, and that's when we can get into a bit more of the wordsmithing bit of it. And then in October, we're hoping to get the kind of public hearing draft, and we're going to get to each of those for each of the elements, and then have a public hearing on all of the elements at the same time towards the end of the process.
Great. So hopefully that's clear to everybody. And I just wanted to lay that out to point out that this is going to be in front of us probably no fewer than 3 times, including this evening. So just want to make sure that, that we know that we're going to have plenty of time to go through all of that. So John, before we go, I've got 2 hands. Carolyn, did you have a question first about the first part of this?
Yes. Could staff clarify for us the nature of the review that planning commissioners are asked to do? I would preface that by saying, is there another commission at the city that looks in detail at what transportation projects are proposed? Because I don't think that, I don't have the kind of knowledge to actually look at what transportation projects are proposed and say anything about that. But how the plan relates to the land use element and all of that, that makes sense. That seems like it resonates with my role as a planning commissioner. We get some clarification on that.
Sure. So there is not another transportation planning committee at the city. The 6-year transportation improvement program is reviewed by the city council every year. And so it's kind of a rolling review in that regard. So that's where it gets the most review. And that's where a lot of these projects have come from as well.
So we don't have to look at the list of transportation projects and scratch our heads and make a comment as to whether they make sense to us. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think probably where you can look at the policies, I think, and whether or not those make sense in terms of how we're managing growth or planning to manage growth in as it relates to transportation. That might be an easier way to interface with the document because it is pretty technical on the project list.
Okay, thank you.
Hit my mute button. Vice Chair Murphy.
Just want to go back to John, your comment that we seem to have enough money in the kitty to cover all these expenses. But you also made a comment about everything is going to be updated in terms of costs. And And I do think we all know that all this stuff is a lot more expensive. Some of us know a lot more than others about it. But was your comment about there being enough money reflect the updated costs, or is that the current estimates?
We have already gone through the project list that's in the document, and we've updated those costs. And then we did sort of the basically a funding analysis, looking at various sources of money that either comes through the state or the real estate excise tax. There's little pots of money that come in from transportation related projects. And those pots of money look like we are okay in terms of funding capability.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
As best can be deciphered from a 20-year crystal ball.
True. Okay, so I'm going to just sort of bring this up. Hopefully it's going to pop in the right place here. And
Yep, we see it.
Can you guys see it okay? I will not try to look at, I mean, if it's teeny tiny type, I'll just sort of point out a few of the things that maybe we can get your juices flowing in terms of what you might want to be looking at, or and reviewing and maybe making comments about.
Yeah.
Few things.
John, sorry, I have one question, Commissioner Boatsman.
Yeah, I had actually a question about something that was stated in the staff memo. So that kind of precedes this. So I should ask that first, I think. It doesn't, I don't think you need to get the thing up there on the screen, but let me just ask, in the table 1 in the staff memo, there are items which are required, and then there are items which are local choice. I noticed that, for example, T5 and T6, both of which had to do with pedestrian and bicycle facilities plan, which are local choice options. I noticed that the draft policy on those things doesn't seem to be written yet. And I was wondering why in this draft that's not yet available for us to look at.
So on that, John, I think I can answer that. That's the kind of thing that we would take a comment on. If there's something missing, does that, so yeah.
Well, here it's listed as if it's something that needs to be done. So
that was
are you saying this is something planning commissioners would need to draft and say if they think something needs to be done, or do you think it needs to be done?
No, if we miss something from the scope of work, we just need to get that in there for the next draft. So we'll take a look at that and respond to that.
So it's something that might be missing. Okay. And other things that are listed as local choice, was the intention to include those in this draft at this time?
Yes.
Generally speaking? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay, just sort of moving through this, transportation element, there were kind of the changes we made. We probably didn't touch any of your goals. We would look at your policies, and we'd look at the language of the policies compared to the 2021 King County countywide planning policies. And we potentially modify policy language. We might add a new policy, or we might substitute a policy that was from the King County countywide planning policies for an existing policy, just different wording or different emphasis. And really what we're trying to do with that is get our comprehensive plan, the transportation element, to be consistent with those policies. So, and we need to be consistent with the policies, because we'll go through a review process of the transportation element that PSRC, the regional council, will look at our transportation element. And one of the things they're looking for is, are we consistent with those King County countywide planning policies? So we're just sort of bringing those things up to date. There were a few little housekeeping things that, for example, dates have changed, or maybe there was anything from spelling or a word choice that we kind of thought, well, this might be a little bit tighter. There were some other things, such as back in 2018, we were a little more concerned about I-90 and the reversible lanes. That's no longer kind of on our plate. So we kind of took out a lot of those types of comments. So here we've got just sort of a lot of the, as you can see, we've mentioned the fact that we've got the light rail station is going to be there, and it's going to be connecting Mercer Island to other cities such as Seattle and Bellevue. Then we get into the goals and policies. Most of these, as I said, are small changes or adding something that we were really close on this policy, but the King County wanted something, some comment about nonprofit providers, and we added the words nonprofit providers into one of those policies to make it consistent with the policy. So we can go and point to, if when we get through the review, if they say, we want to know if King County policy number, whatever it is, 2.5 is in your plan, we could say, yes, it's in policy 2.3. So it's that kind of updates. And there were a couple that weren't mandatory policies from King County, that one of the reasons why we've added them in, and let me see if I can find them, is that I believe it's 7. Okay. There's one that's about, excuse me, I thought I had this number written down, but apparently I don't. Oh, 7.3, which is the policy reads, reduce the number of deaths and serious injuries caused by vehicle collisions on Mercer Island to 0 by 2030. One of the things we do a lot of is we write grant applications for transportation projects. And one of the things that comes up in all those grant applications is, does the city have a policy related to reducing or eliminating crash-related deaths and injuries? And so we added 7.3 as in order that that would be covered in the document. The other one that we added, or we changed some wording on, was about transportation connectivity. There's sometimes people, because of issues with traffic and there is always some interest that people may want to close streets. And typically there are some disadvantages, particularly with emergency vehicle access and such, that closing streets isn't necessarily a very good idea. And it's not really a good idea it tends to shift traffic to another street, and then your problem's now your neighbor's problem. And so it's one of those things that we try to discourage. So we have added that one in there, and it isn't one of the, and that's 7.9. So that's just 2 of the goals that I believe. The rest of them are related to the King County planning-wide policies.
Anyone who's been to Berkeley will be in support of 7.9.
So we then get into sort of a discussion about existing conditions. This is just what the traffic system or transportation system looks on the island. And I'm not going to spend much time on this, but we go through everything from where the speed limits change, this idea of level of service. You can see in table 1 how things operate today, either in the morning or in the afternoon. Commute hours is what we tend to take a look at. And this is also shown as a map. There is one intersection here. I don't know if I can zoom in here. No, apparently not. It's I believe it's 53rd and Island Crest Way. And that one operates at a level service F with a stop sign. And there's other requirements for improving intersections, like you can't just stick a signal in because you have a level of service F. You have to have a certain level of traffic before you could put a signal in. And it doesn't, is kind of the story. So we kind of have left that as an indication that there is something that may need to be done at some point, but right now, we're not doing anything is kind of the best way I can say that.
John, can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Adam, I don't know if when we talked about this in 2018, I recall there was a conversation around looking at like level of service today is basically measuring the efficiency of vehicles through an intersection and really doesn't take into account pedestrian safety and pedestrian movement. And I remember there was talk at that time around doing a similar scoring system around pedestrian safety, pedestrian mobility. The example that John just gave with that intersection is at an F because there's a school right there and the priority is over the safety of the movement of the kids across the street there and those sorts of things. So I remember we had talked about that. I'm assuming that's probably way too much to take on for this revision, but I'm curious, is that something that is still something that other cities have done, or like how has that approach been taken? I don't want to lose it, even if we pin it and say we'll get back to it in a couple of years when we do a major update. But I don't know. Adam, I don't think you were here at the time, but Allison may have a memory. But I wanted to highlight that as something that's been discussed in the past and is certainly relevant to such an intricate network like we have here. So I didn't know if you had any immediate thoughts on that or.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. There's a lot of communities that have attempted to measure either a bicycle level of service standard, or there's communities who look at it from a people moving perspective, such as you measure what portion of the future transportation network is complete, and therefore you measure your level of service in that way. There's some complications related to that. I know I recall also having some discussions about this, because I believe in the 2014 transportation element update, we had really a big discussion about how would we measure level of service and how best to look at it. The one thing that we do for the city is our level of service, we're measuring where arterial streets come together, not measure like where a smaller neighborhood street might try to come in at Island Crest Way. It's so we've gone through those discussions. We also had a discussion, I know, on whether or not the town center should be at a level of service C versus the rest of the islands at a level of service D. So there's some trade-offs related to that. So those aspects of level of service would be a far bigger discussion. And I think you're right that it will probably be a topic for the bigger update in 2026. So
Great, thanks for the background.
Again, this is one of the things that has been updated or will be updated. And these are just little notes. We are, the city right now is revising these maps in their GIS system. And when those are done, they'll be included in the document. So there's little things such as we've put in some crosswalk signals in 3 locations on the north end of the island. We've also now have a paved shoulder on one side of West Mercer Way. That's been completed since the last time we've done this. There will probably be a few things like, for example, this data in this park and ride table is, I'm going to guess, out of date, but no one's done an update of it. So it's typically King County Metro will look at how much spaces are available and how many are being used as part of I think they do it every couple of years, but due to the pandemic, they decided not to. So we didn't update this. It's also something that will probably wait. So based on the land use, we did bring up our level of service to up to the 2044. And then from there, we base our recommended improvements. So this is the improvement map. Once again, this map needs to get updated with the updated table, which is down here. So this is all of the transportation non-motorized projects, and these are coming from your bicycle and pedestrian plan for Mercer Island. That plan is also going to be updated. Either Adam or Patrick, do you recall what year that's going to be? I think it's in the next couple of years.
It's in our 6-year transportation improvement program, program for years 2026 and 2027.
Okay, so it's probably then we won't be, if it's 2026, 2027, it will probably be starting about the time we've got our next 2026 update going. So I'm not entirely sure if that's going to be reflected. But this is based on the current, I believe it's a 2010 pedestrian and bicycle plan. And as it's been updated, and it's also related back to the transportation, 6-year transportation improvement program, where these projects get prioritized by city council in order that these projects can get on this list. And this is really the list of how we look ahead on improvements. And if you sort of read through some of them and think, oh, as I drive down Gallagher Hill Road, yeah, there is no sidewalk somewhere. It'd be nice that there was. So that was a project that's been out there, this non-motorized 4. So that's one of the projects that's currently in the TIP project, but now is also going to be in the transportation element.
Sorry, John, 1 second. I
Sure.
thought I saw a hand. Was there a hand from someone? Commissioner Curry?
There's the mute button. So I'm curious about the Gallagher Hill sidewalk. Is that the one that's going towards I-90 or the one coming up towards 40th on the other side of the road where the one doesn't exist already?
Well, I believe it's on the east side of the street. Am I correct, Patrick?
It's on the east side of the street, approximately
Okay.
from Southeast 40th north down the hill to where it intersects with Southeast 36th Street. So it's all on the south side of I-90.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Is that something that maybe that could be updated in there as the description to make sure that folks know exactly? Because they'll look at it and say, well, there's an existing sidewalk. Why are we going to go in and tear that out?
It'll also be reflected on the map that John was talking about.
Yeah. And we tend to try to put limits on the projects, and it's actually a very good comment, Commissioner Curry. That would probably be a great comment to provide for us, that we should have limits of that section of Gallagher Hill Road, just to make that crystal clear, because it's right now just saying a sidewalk improvement, whereas most of the other projects we're really defining it goes from here to here. And so that would be one of those good clarifications. I'm not going to, with all the improvements, things get a lot better. As you can see, the 53rd place Island Crest Way, if there was an improvement there, the operation will go from F up to B. Once again, we're not sure on the timing of how that might work. Yeah.
Carolyn, you have a question?
On this page 32, about halfway down, you're talking about the sound transit mitigation funds. I wonder if it would fit in here to say which pot of money those go into, or what limitations are on the spending. I just immediately wondered, well, does that just go into the general budget, or I seem to have heard that that's not the case. That might be useful information there, but it's also a question for you right now if you know the answer.
I believe they're only for operational, transportation, operational, and safety improvements.
So since that's a very special pot of money, I think it would be a comment, I'll throw it out here now, but I'll also write it in my written comments that maybe it would be helpful to know that here. Thanks.
Okay, sure.
Adam, I see your hand.
Yeah, kind of follow up on that one. Is that annually or is that a one-time lump, or is that 5.1 spread over X years?
I believe that as part of the Sound Transit settlement, that there was this pot of money that was designated to the city for a one-time up to $5.1 million for the city to identify improvements. And
Okay.
there is, in my understanding, is they don't necessarily have to be just at the station. They can be more system related. Is that a
Yeah, that
correct
answers.
statement? Yeah. So
Thank you.
that's pretty much it. I mean, the other thing that we looked at is, you know, the Puget Sound Regional Council updates their metropolitan transportation plan. I believe they do it at least every 10 years. I sometimes think they might do it at a more frequent basis, but right now they're at 2050. So we're also thinking, how do we align with that metropolitan transportation plan for regional transportation projects? So it's just a kind of a side comment. So that's it. I have nothing else. If you guys, I'm certainly any questions that you might have at this point, fine. But we do look forward to your written comments as you get through the document.
Carolyn, is that a new hand or is that your hand from before?
That is a new hand.
Excellent. Go ahead.
By when does the sound transit mitigation money have to be spent?
I believe it's either by the end of 2024 or slightly into 2025, from what I recall. If you need the specific date, I can do a little bit of research tomorrow and get back to you all.
Are there any plans made yet for spending it?
Yes, there are lots of plans, and the way that this is all kind of planned out and spent ultimately is through the 6-year transportation improvement program.
Okay.
All the projects that are that will use those funds and use them currently are identified in the TIP, and that's what the city council adopts. So for example, we are nearly completed with a mid-block crosswalk in the downtown, just north of the Starbucks on 76th Avenue. That sidewalk, or I'm sorry, that crosswalk improvement is intended to help people to walk to and from the light rail station. Therefore, we're using the sound transit mitigation funds. We're also going to be improving the intersection at Sunset Highway and 77th Avenue. That would be just south of the 77th Avenue entry to the light rail station. We're going to create an intersection improvement that raises the intersection to calm traffic and then improve the crosswalks with flashing beacons, again, to make it easier for pedestrians. So those are two examples.
So lots of things are already underway using that money.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carolyn. So with that, just closing out the transportation, sort of the intro to the transportation element, do any other commissioners have any clarifying questions or broad sweeping questions that'll help in your formulation of comments and thoughts for when we bring this back? All right, I hear none. Thank you, John, for covering that off. So again, we'll be coming back to discussion around the transportation element. And then it looks like our next item will be to go through the do the same thing that we just did for the land use element. So Adam, I don't know if you'd like to kick us off on that. I should ask, I know it's 7 o'clock. How long do you expect this to take? About the same amount of time, Adam?
I would think so, yeah. It's a very similar format, yeah.
Okay. I'll just make a quick call. I think if we're going to be less than an hour, then we'll move through, but and we'll wait and take a break just in case, or we'll wait a little bit if someone needs to take a break. If we're going too long, then we can make that call in a little bit.
All
Go ahead.
right. Thanks, John and Patrick. Appreciate it. Yeah. All right. Let me get my screen shared here. All right. So tonight is the first touch on the land use element, the first of many, as we mentioned earlier, as part of our comprehensive plan update. Let's see, here we go. So our purpose tonight is to, I want to walk you through the first draft of amendments to the land use element to get you prepared to, again, provide that written feedback through the month of August. We're looking for feedback no later than or by August 31st, so we can go through that at the September meeting. Just to start out with, the land use element this is from the Growth Management Act, some of the language. I thought it was a good kind of definition of what a land use element is. It's an element of the comprehensive plan that describes the general distribution, location, and extent of uses of land throughout the city. And then some of the important pieces that need to be included in that are population densities, our building intensities, and estimates of our future population growth. So it's really a description of our overall strategy for managing growth and land use changes over time throughout the planning period of the comprehensive plan. One of the really key Growth Management Act requirements of our land use element is that it must provide adequate development capacity to accommodate our projected growth. And here in King County, for cities in King County, those are expressed as growth targets for both housing and employment. And then the goals and policies of the land use element in addressing the need to accommodate that growth. Those goals and policies provide really important guidance for the formulation of our development regulations in the Mercer Island City Code. That's one of the main points where the rubber meets the road for the land use element. There are some kind of major pieces of the land use elements as we're looking through it today. There's the introductory text, which is where we establish those, like we talk about existing conditions, so the building intensities, the development or the residential densities, those types of things. That's also where we establish that we have that adequate capacity to accommodate our growth targets, and then what those growth targets are. So all of that's included in the introductory text. And that's actually, that section of the plan is where we have quite a bit of leeway in how we write that and tell the narrative about what's going on in the city today and what we expect in the future. And then following that, we have our goals and policies. And the goals are kind of these high level objectives of what we're trying to accomplish with the plan. And then the policies describe kind of the strategies that we're going to use to deploy, or that we're going to deploy to achieve those goals. And policies generally break out into kind of three separate categories. Policies about programs, so city programs, policies about development code, and then policies about other tools. So a good example of an other tool would be like the project list in the transportation element that we were just looking at. That's not really about our programs or development code. It's about how we're making capital budget decisions. And so those are the three kind of general categories of policies in the comp plan. You'll hear me say this quite a bit. Those of you in our work groups have already heard it a couple of times. Our scope is really focused and narrow for a lot of these elements that we're working on in the comprehensive plan. We're calling it our surgical update because we're really just focusing on those requirements to maintain consistency and compliance with the Growth Management Act. The general direction from council is that for the most part, our plan is working pretty well and we don't need to make major changes. We just need to focus on updating those growth targets and making those other technical amendments required by GMA. There's a couple other amendments that are proposed in the draft that we'll look at today. And those were made to account for planning projects that have been undertaken since the last update. So for example, adopting the Parks, Recreation and Open Space plan or PROS plan by reference is taking into account that now we have this plan that we didn't have 6 years ago when we last touched the land use element. And again, we're not really overhauling, we're just making fine tuning minimal amendments to the land use element. We talked about this a little bit at the beginning of the transportation element presentation, but I wanted to touch on the process that we're looking at with the land use element. So we have our first briefing tonight, and then we're asking for comments in August. And then in September, we'll put together those comments that we received from you. And we'll look at those at the next meeting. And that's where we can get into some more of the kind of wordsmithing of those different amendments. And then if necessary, if we still need to have another touch on it, we'll come back in October to kind of put the finishing touches on what we're calling the public hearing draft. But really the public hearing draft is not the final draft. You'll have a couple more bites at the apple before making a recommendation. So once we have these hearing drafts together, we plan on holding an open house on the overall comprehensive plan update, during which time the public can give us some feedback on the amendments that we've made to the comprehensive plan or that we're proposing. And then we'll have a work session following that open house where you can respond to those comments that were made at the open house, and then move to the public hearing. And then once we get to the public hearing, as we're taking public testimony, you can respond to that. You can make changes to your draft all the way up until you make your final recommendation to the city council. So all of that is to say that we have our 3 touches in the next 3 months. But before we adopt anything in 2024, you'll have a couple more chances to revisit things. So we're really, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, or a lot of time ahead of us to consider these changes. So tonight I'll walk you through where we've made some changes to the comprehensive plan, very similar to how John just walked through the transportation element. And again, we'll just kind of focus on clarifying questions, and then we'll work on refining and getting into the possible changes to language at the next meeting in September. So with that, let me get the element open here. I see a hand raised. I can answer a question before I get into it.
Okay. Again, from the staff memo, I have a couple questions. In the table 1, LU6, it talks about adding policy to land use element goal 14 regarding preserving existing commercial use square footage in town center. Mm-hmm. Could you summarize again for me where the council ended up on this particular topic? I'm still probably not quite up to speed as to what the decision was.
Sure. So they did adopt a minimum commercial frontage retail square footage with the pink lines map. They did adopt that with a variable FAR, or that FAR option, the floor area ratio. I don't remember the exact details of what was adopted, but that it was very similar to what was recommended by the Planning Commission in February. And that should be in effect by December.
Wasn't it FAR? And I'm having a hard time because we went back and forth on this so many times. Wasn't it FAR or existing space?
Correct. Yeah, yeah, it's those are the two kind of options with that one. Yeah.
And then that's combined with retail street frontage.
Mhm.
I
And all of that is to achieve that with that idea of no net loss of the
Right.
commercial space. Yeah.
I suppose what prompted my question is I'm wondering, when you talk about no net loss, let's see, preserving existing commercial use square footage. So if a very large particular business, for example, decide to shut their doors and turn themselves into apartments, is that not allowed, or did they decide not to go there?
Well, in that case, if it were on one of those frontages, they would have to maintain that commercial square footage. They couldn't
So-
just go purely residential.
So does that mean they meet the FAR that everyone else has to meet? Or does that mean if QFC wants to do something, they have to still have the same amount of space in commercial business? That's my question. Where'd that end up?
That might be a little more technical than I can answer tonight.
Okay, all right, no worries.
Mhm.
And then one more question on that page. It says,
Mhm.
review land use goals and policies for consistency with planning actions taken since the previous update.
Mhm.
Does that refer to planning actions that might have been done on a yearly basis? Since
it's
that
in-
last significant update?
Right. So my example in the slideshow was the pros plan. So adopting that by reference. Now that
Okay.
we have this new pros plan, we want to
Okay.
adopt it by reference into our land use element. So
Okay.
that's reflecting
it.
that.
And one
It's
last
not-
question.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's not like we processed 1,000 building permits, or you know what I mean? Like we're not saying that in the
Yeah.
plan. That
Okay.
is what you were asking.
I get it. Thank you. And then one last question is, I'm working in the housing work group, and I noticed that the land use element, talks quite a bit about housing capacity and that sort of thing. So how do the land use element and the housing element, how do they relate to each other? Where's the line between those two?
Right. That's a good question. I think that's something that we're going to have to navigate with the work group in particular, what goes into the housing element versus the land use element. Generally, if we have things that are talking about quantity of, how many use or how many houses are allowed, we'll
Mhm.
probably want to incorporate that into the land use element. I didn't put the asterisk in here like I did for the economic development element. But as we're going through the housing element, if there are those things that we need to address as part of our housing strategy overall, we can come back in here and make those amendments at that time.
Okay.
So
I noticed we didn't talk about capacity in the housing work group. So that seems to be a division right there. Like you
Mhm.
said, number of units, land use element,
mhm.
type of housing element, I guess, or something. like
Mhm.
that.
And capacity is actually, I'm glad you brought that up. So one of the things, so capacity is generally about how much developable land you have and how much density is allowed on that developable land.
Oh, okay.
That's a quick way of summarizing it. And
Mhm.
essentially because we have adequate development capacity to accommodate our growth
Mhm.
targets, enough houses can be built on the developable land to accommodate
I
it.
see.
Our direction for this update is that we're not increasing capacity, or that we don't, that's not really on the table for us. So we're not looking at increasing zoning or, upzoning something or increasing residential density through this update. And that's an important distinction, because that's where we're being much more surgical, because that's a really big thing to change zoning, right?
Yeah.
Or change our land use designations.
So that means the housing work group cannot talk about changing zoning. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, we're really just focusing there. We need to look at how, kind of within our existing framework, how do we meet our needs, and what needs are maybe not being met beyond just sheer numbers.
Yeah, I think we'll start talking a lot about different types of housing, like different kinds of affordable housing for different segments of the community, other kinds of special housing like emergency shelters, transitional housing. We may also talk about things like housing for seniors or housing for people with disabilities, and what's needed for each of those kinds of groups of people.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right. If there are no other questions, I'll get right into it here. Share my screen. And that, okay, so to start out with, again, it starts out with the element starts out with the introductory text here. We won't go through the exact changes to the words, but we really just updated most of this introduction to add on to the narrative of what's happened since the last time we updated the comprehensive plan. And so we added some language here to talk about the town center process recently undertaken. The first substantial changes are in the growth forecast section here in section 3. This is where we're updating the growth targets to reflect the new housing and employment growth targets that were set by the King County countywide planning policies. And this is again to extend the planning horizon through the year 2044. There's a couple of things you can see. I added some tables in here that are drawn from the urban growth capacity report that King County prepared last year that talk about our job capacity and then our housing capacity down here, going over where we have capacity in the city. There's a couple other sections in here in the growth forecast section. You'll see these notes I left highlighted in green and bolded, where there's just some commentary. And in the forecast section, there's some data from the Puget Sound Regional Council that they're still working on updating. So this section, and we expect to get that data. I just talked to them yesterday. It sounds like October we should have that information, so we'll be able to update this before we wrap up here with the new data from PSRC. I see a hand up. Oh, Adam, you're muted.
Real quick, minor question on table 5 after medium low density. Is that medium high density or medium? I think it's high, right? Not height,
yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah,
just wanted to make sure. All right, that's all. Thank you.
This is why we go through a couple of drafts. Yeah.
Carolyn, I see your hand.
Yeah, so I was wondering, why is the comprehensive plan so narrative? In other words, instead of stating this is our goals and policies, why does it have pages of history in it? And is that effective when people, do you think it's effective when people are just trying to figure out what's this city all about? Is there another place to put that history besides in a comp plan? Just curious what you think.
So one of the reasons that we have this section is to give an idea of what conditions we're responding to with our goals and policies. So when the next Adam is working for the city, you can see like, oh, okay, this is why they made these policy choices, right? They had, in 2022, they had X density, they had this much capacity, and so they responded with these goals and policies. So in that way, I do think it's pretty valuable. I would say for folks that are trying to understand kind of where the rubber meets the road, you could skip it and go right to the goals and policies, because that is the meat of the element is in the goals and policies. But I do think it's valuable to have some narrative at the beginning to tell how we got to where we are.
Yeah. It just seems that as the years go by, the narrative pages get longer and longer and longer.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of wonder, is it time to, maybe trim back what happened in 1980 or?
Yeah. Well, you can go either way. I mean, you could go really light on it and then maybe you leave something out. And then I think here, my approach in preparing this draft was to stick to just those places that we need to add for extending our planning horizon, and then a couple other things just to make sure that we're, again, kind of up to date, rather than doing, because I mean, I could get my red pen out and really
Oh,
go to
yeah.
town, but taking that light touch approach again. Yeah.
I mean, I realize it's the surgical approach this
Mhm.
time, but maybe those kinds of changes are what they do when they have a major rewrite. I mean,
Oh,
sometimes you talk about,
definitely. Yeah.
that's probably when that gets looked at. Okay,
Mhm.
thank
And-
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean,
And-
certainly in other updates, you could do a real overhaul of the whole element and a full
Yeah.
repeal, replace, and
Okay.
do that. But that's
It-
it's a lot of public process to do that.
Sure.
And Adam, I was just gonna note flavor just because I've had experience with this in other cities like Newcastle when I was there, that our comp plan is not unique in that narrative. Like this is the general structure that most of these comp plans run by since they were enacted back in the 90s. So I do agree, Carolyn, generally that we should be mindful of how much language we use, but it is a common tool that's used.
Okay, thank you. Thought it was worth consideration. Yep. Just understanding.
So again, with the introduction here, you can read through and see where I've made the changes. I guess just a thing, if you're not used to looking at this format, it might be a little confusing, but it's all in strikeout underline. So anything that's crossed out like this is going away. Anything that's underlined is new. So here I'm trimming these two paragraphs and adding a new paragraph there. So as you're reading through, that's what's going on there. Then let's see, so now we'll get to the goals and policies. The first policy that we're proposing to add is under goal 2. We're proposing a new policy 2.2. This one is again pointed at that preserving existing quantity of commercial square footage in town center as new development occurs. So that's driving at that recent code change. And then the next change, we left most of this intact. We're proposing to strike this figure TC1, which is the pink lines map. We're going to strike this because we're actually, that's getting adopted into our development code. And we don't need to have it duplicated in both places. We're actually not probably, we're going to come back with and do this as a comp plan amendment this year so that our comp plan remains consistent with that code change. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at your September meeting. And let's see, the next one here, skip down to goal 13. I changed the, this figure TC-2 is also proposed. Well, the existing figure is going to be struck. It needs to be replaced with what was actually adopted by the ordinance. It looks like there's a Scribner's error in our comp plan land use element where this figure is the wrong figure. But I went back and found the one from the ordinance. We just have to get it from our GIS folks for the next draft. The heading for goal 13 was revised because goal 13 is really about green building as opposed to sustainability. So revised that header. And then under goal 14, I added this note here. This section of policies, again, will be reviewed for consistency with the economic development element once we've drafted that. So we might make some more changes to goal 14 and its associated policies before we're through. And like pretty likely that that's going to happen. And then for sure, we want to add another policy under goal 14 about maintaining our existing commercial square footage in town center. I realized there was a typo in this one. I have new development twice. That doesn't need to be in there. So we'll get that fixed for the next draft. But this policy is really directed at that maintaining commercial square footage in town center. Policy 15.1 is amended. This amendment is really for clarity. There were a lot of words in this policy, but I think at the end of the day, it was trying to just say one thing. And so we cut that down for clarity. Let's see here, 18.5 is the next one. The next change, 18.5, we're just striking this. This policy is about updating our critical areas regulations as required by the Growth Management Act. The existing policy includes this every 8 years timeframe for it. That timeframe, the legislature can move it up and down. And there's not really anything added, or there's no benefit added by having it in there. So just to make sure that our comp plan is always consistent with GMA, strike the 8-year requirement out of that. And then 18.10 is adopting the stormwater management program plan by reference into the land use element. That's another one of those where we're making an amendment to account for like recent planning activities. The header above goal 19 is proposed to be struck. Parks and open space policies actually start at goal 20. So we're just reorganizing that there. Otherwise, the only change under goal, no changes to the policies associated with goal 19. So here you can see parks and open spaces header over goal 20. And then under goal 20, the only policy proposed to change here is 20.14. This is to establish a park zone and development regulations to preserve and enhance public parkland for the enjoyment of all Mercer Island residents, visitors, and future generations. This was a local choice option that was added to our scope by the council. They want to adopt a park zone as part of the comp plan update. So this policy creates the directive to create that park zone as part of our implementation process. Let's see, for next, we propose striking policy 21.5. This is a policy that's really directed at our sustainability tracking framework that's talked about in goal 26, the STAR community framework. And that's no longer that community rating framework, which is kind of like LEAD, doesn't exist anymore. So we're not going to require ourselves to track our STAR rating if they're defunct. And so this policy is one that's being deleted in response to that. Then let's see here. Minor change to the header for arts and culture, actually making it arts and culture instead of arts and cultural. Just a grammatical thing. Change the header for goal 25 to historical preservation. And then here again is our STAR community framework. We're striking that header and changing the header to climate change because these goals here, these goals and policies are really directed at climate change. So we strike goal 26 and its associated policies because again, that STAR community framework for assessing sustainability doesn't exist anymore. And so we're getting rid of those policies directed there. You'll also notice that there's a note here as we work on the climate action plan, these climate change goals and policies will probably, again, get another update similar to what we'll do with housing and economic development, just to make sure that everything's all consistent among those plans. So we might take another touch at climate change once we have that climate action plan. Let's see, 26.1. So this first climate change policy was really just amended for clarity. That's another spot where we could get a little more concise with our language. So we made that change there. You'll see the policies are all renumbered here. And then under goal 27, we're proposing, that's where we'll adopt the climate action plan by reference. It's worth pointing out now, I guess, just for repetition, that the comp plan update that we're working on today won't be adopted until 2024. So there's going to be some things that are kind of happening at the same time that we're working on this stuff. And so the climate action plan will actually be adopted well before we get through with the comp plan update. So we want to make sure we've got that accounted for in here. Then there's one change to this action plan item, just taking out this reference to 2035. It doesn't really need to be time specific to maintain the spirit of that action item. And then this is another strange kind of Scrivener's error in the element. This map was inserted here. Doesn't really need to be there, and there's no reference to it, so we'll strike that. And then finally, so this is the land use map, which designates areas of the island for kind of the general land uses that those areas will be used for. It's more or less like the foundation for our zoning. We're not proposing any changes to the land use map, but we are proposing to simplify the symbology here. So the way that things are represented on this map, just to optimize it for web viewing, because it's currently the way it's set up right now, we can't put it on our website, and there's no reason for that. So we'll get that cleaned up. I see a couple of hands.
Yep, Victor.
So I have a number of questions on this map in particular.
Okay.
The legend seems to me to be a little bit of a gumbo. Some of it seems to refer to zoning, and then other parts is a little bit more ambiguous and not. So for instance, town center, currently a pre-moratorium, a significant portion of our town center was zoned as multifamily. So I'm confused by that.
Sure.
Can you kind of delineate how we're mapping this to actual zoning?
Mm-hmm. So in the same way that like our policies don't establish development regulations, they provide the guidance for development regulations, right? The land use map provides the guidance for the zoning that is applied through the development code. So for example, we have several different single family zones, but on the land use map, we've just designated areas for single family land use.
Great. So second question, I'm looking here at the South End Shopping Center.
Mm-hmm.
It's zoned as commercial office. I am not aware of any commercial office, and it actually, that area looks more like the town center than it does this other commercial office space that's near City Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And I seem to remember that was a Scrivener's error.
This was something we corrected in a comp plan update in January.
It keeps replicating.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why that wasn't updated in this version that Adam pulled off the website. Maybe the code publishing had not yet updated it when he downloaded this, something like that, but we can correct that.
Because you recall we had a question from the public about a month or so ago about this particular issue, and I'm sure that's driving some confusion.
Yeah, so that South End Shopping Center should be shown. I forget what the land use designation is. The zone is PBZ, Planned Business Zone. The land use designation is neighborhood business, I believe is the term.
Okay. The third question I have is, how are you differentiating between park and open space? And you said there was going to be a park zone that's adopted by the city council. Will that include open space and linear parks as well?
Yes. Well, maybe not all of the open space, because some of that is may not be public park. But the intention there with the park zone is to create a specific set of regulations for our public parks to accomplish our goals, right?
So, so for instance, on the south end, Pioneer Park is designated as open space. Why is that designated as open space while portions of Luther Burbank are considered park? Is that, how is that measured? Is that based on the amount of development? How do we know that that's an open space and not a park?
I actually don't know the history of how those two designations were defined and separated here in the comp plan. I could guess that it likely has something to do with, you know, like some open spaces, what's categorized as open spaces are predominantly forested and passive recreation uses such as trails, whereas something that's more of a park is predominantly, you know, grass or paving and has more of active recreational uses such as sport courts, playgrounds, things like that.
Okay, and now
Athletic
how
fields.
is that, and now let me throw in linear park.
The linear park is its own thing, which is the, you know, the washed-out land along I-90. I don't know why it was decided to give that its own designation, you know, way back probably in the 90s when that property was, there's an
So-
agreement between the city that we maintain it. It's
And
owned by
so
WashDOT.
do we feel like that's all going to be under a park zone, or is it still going to be this?
I think that's something we need to define as part of this process.
Mhm.
That's it for me. Thank you.
I think to that last point, Allison, one of the questions that you said is, you know, we have a requirement to maintain that space. And I've been a proponent of this in the past where, and I think Victor was sort of getting to this point where the land use map should be, I don't want to say overly general, but it should certainly be less specific than the zoning map, right? So there may be a linear park zone, there may be an open space zone and a park zone, but should they all just have one designation in the land use? I think that ultimately is the conversation that we should have, which is, should they be a single land use of which there could be several different zoning definitions that have different requirements of how they're developed and why they're developed or how they're maintained, for example. But I think the history, particularly on a couple of these, it might warrant seeing if there is any history so we understand, are there specific requirements like for the linear park that we need to take into consideration.
Yeah, and I guess I'd recommend when we get to the point where we're having those conversations, we should invite some of the park staff to join us that may have a bit more of that history and can also give us some more detailed information about the things we should consider if we were to split this into different types of zoning designations and the kinds of uses and structures and things that we might want to allow or not allow in different types of parkland.
But to put a finer point on what Commissioner Hubble just said, we should just choose. Are we being general? Is this a zoning map or is this something more general?
It's more
Because
general.
right now it's kind of a tweener.
It doesn't know what it wants to be.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree that there's,
That's
you know,
the-
the land
that-
uses for housing tend to be general, but then for some reason, these
Right.
park and open space lands tend to be more specific, which is odd.
That's my gumbo comment. It's a
Mhm.
little bit of everything. We've thrown a little bit of everything in there.
And if we were doing a really big update, we might want to think about adopting some more kind of designation policies about how we're designating things on the land use map, or we could make this a little bit more specific in that context. But I think with our
or not,
right,
just choose.
right, and really, the intent here, I'm pretty certain, is to be fairly general and to keep this at a high level, because again, it's like the general direction of how we're going to how we're going to apply our zoning, similar to like you have a policy that says like regulate commercial uses in town center, and then you have regulations that say how you're going to do that, right? You have the land use map that says this is a single family area, and then you have a zoning map that says this neighborhood is R 8.6. So it is intended to be more of a general high level map.
So I know that's the last figure in this, Adam. Did you have anything else before we sort of more broadly open this up for questions?
No, yeah, that's a pretty quick run through of what we have, the amendments that we've proposed. Hopefully you'll have some time over the next couple of weeks to sit down and kind of dig into what the element says and get your comments together, and by the 31st, the end of August there.
Great. Looks like Carolyn's got her hand up. And for the rest of you, if you have any just general questions or clarifying things that you want to get to, please feel free to chime in. So, Carolyn.
Seems a little odd to raise one's hand just to make a cheeky comment, but I have to make this cheeky comment. You mean we'll be doing our commenting during the August recess? Thank you so much.
Well, you've got 4 days before recess. Yeah.
Good.
Carolyn, yes, you have homework over spring break. Adam, Michael, any other comments? Victor, any other comments or questions?
I jammed all mine in.
All right.
All right. Well, hearing none, Adam, thank you very much. I think we have a clear understanding of the process moving forward, and I'm assuming that you'll be sending out a reminder to all of us as that deadline approaches on August 31st for additional comments.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you all for working through those two presentations. That brings us to item number 4 on our agenda under other business, which is the director's report. Allison, do you have anything for us today?
Just a few brief things. First of all, just a reminder, please send me a tally of your volunteer hours for, I think it was April, May, June. We need to track those for our insurance purposes, and the HR department's been hounding me. I need to turn them in. So if you could please just shoot me a quick email. I really just need to know the number of hours for each month. So it's pretty simple. And estimate. It doesn't have to be perfect. Let's see. I wanted to talk a little bit about what's coming up for our next meeting, couple of meetings, and then also I'll circle back and give a quick update on council business. So first thing I wanted to mention, we're going to be scheduling a joint session with the City Council on September 6th at 5 p.m., a joint study session, and we'll be briefing you all together on the housing needs assessment and economic analysis that our consultant has been working on for the past several months. We're expecting that those reports will be completed here in the next month or so, and we'll be rolling out the results and giving you all a chance to ask questions and get the same information to both the council and the commission at the same time, both for efficiency, but I think also just so that you all can learn together what the consultant found with those reports. So please mark your calendar for that date, September 6th. It'll be available on Zoom, or you could attend in person at City Hall. Secondly, our next meeting of the Planning Commission is scheduled for September 28th. We've got a few things queued up for that meeting. As Adam already mentioned, we're anticipating that you all will send in your comments here over the next month on the land use and transportation elements. And then we'll be bringing those back for further discussion and wordsmithing at the September meeting. Trying to kind of hone in on that public hearing draft. I don't want to call it the final draft. It's the public hearing draft. And And then also at that meeting, we will have Jeff and Sarah again joining us for a couple of items. We'll be having 2 public hearings, one on the outdoor dining provisions. Sarah has worked with City Council to have some interim regulations during the pandemic to allow outdoor dining. That's been extended several times. We're looking to bring some permanent regulations related to that for review by you all and then out to City Council before the end of the year. And Adam already mentioned briefly during his review of the land use element that Pink Lines map, we need to remove it from the comp plan. And so we'll be bringing that comp plan amendment for a public hearing in September as well. It's kind of just the housekeeping that needs to happen as a follow-up to the code amendment that was adopted by City Council earlier this summer. So I think those 2 items will probably be fairly straightforward and hopefully quick, but just wanted to let you know they're coming up. Okay, so quick update on City Council. I don't think they had anything directly related to Planning Commission regulations on their calendar in July, but they did do a first reading of an ordinance to extend the interim regulations they enacted last September related to emergency shelters and transitional housing. This was in response to some state legislation requiring cities to allow these types of emergency housing in certain areas of the city. We already had on the books some regulations that essentially did that, and this interim regulation just adds some specific language to make sure it's very clear that those things are allowed. However, part of the state legislation also speaks to making sure we can accommodate a certain number of those types of housing units, and that number is yet to be determined and provided by the Department of Commerce. We're expecting that information probably by the end of this year. So what's being proposed is to extend the current interim regulations for another 6 months, and by then we should have data from Commerce on those targets we need to plan for. And so at that time, we can evaluate whether any additional changes to those regulations are needed, and then a permanent regulation would come back to Planning Commission next year for review. So that's my update. Does anyone have any questions?
Commissioner Murphy?
Quick question on the joint session of Council and Planning Commission. Are we going to see the draft reports in advance so we're in a position to actually ask questions, or are we just there to listen?
Yeah, the reports will be provided as part of the council packet for that meeting, which goes out a week in advance.
Great.
Well, almost a week in advance. The meeting's on a Tuesday. It'll go out the Wednesday evening before that.
And is that going to be a virtual meeting, or is that an in-person?
It's hybrid, so the council has been participating in person, or many of the council members have. I think I should clarify this. I think probably the expectation would be that the Planning Commission would join via Zoom, but I can check what's possible if folks would like to be there in person.
Okay. I know these meetings, just staying on that theme, have been listed as hybrid. It was clarified to me it meant that people could participate in person by viewing at the community center, I believe. Is there an indication of when we're going to go back to in-person meetings? As much as I love it staring at you all on a screen,
I don't have a very specific answer to that question at this time. I know that our IT team has been working hard to try to come up with the technology and a process to run a hybrid meeting in a way that can be done by just 1 or 2 staff members. As you know, when we staff these Planning Commission meetings, it's often just myself and Adam, or some combination of 1 or 2 staff. With the City Council meetings, the way they've done the hybrid meetings for the last several months, they have at least 2 IT support people working behind the scenes to run the meeting, in addition to the staff that are actually appearing and and presenting information at the meeting. So to date, we haven't had the capacity to use that same system that they've been using for board and commission meetings. But I hear that they are working on rolling out a much simplified system that would allow us to have some kind of iPad app where we control the cameras and stuff. So I think that it's coming soon. I just don't know exactly when.
Okay. Good. Anything else from you, Allison?
That's all I have.
Very good. So I guess that takes us to, after Allison mentioned the next two meetings, we have the September 6th meeting and the September 28th meeting. It's probably too early to poll the audience on the September meeting, but or on the 28th meeting, but if you know that you're going to be absent at either of those two, I would just say to let staff know with a few weeks notice, just so they can plan accordingly. Specifically for the meeting on the 28th, we'll want to make sure that we have a quorum just in case a group of folks are out. I know the 6th is the Tuesday after Labor Day. So I'm assuming that folks are back. Those of us with kids certainly will be here and in town since school is in session. But if by chance you're going to be away on vacation for a long weekend, if you could just give staff notice ahead of time. Very good. Beyond that, excuse me, does anyone else have any announcements or communications that they wanted to share with the group?
Not really an announcement, just want to say nice work, staff, and thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Adam's put a ton of work into it, so I'm sure he appreciates hearing that.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both very much. And again, for the new team, I'll get to learn Adam and Michael. I'll get to learn you guys a little bit more, and I'll try to reach out here in the next few weeks when I have a little bit more time and try to touch base and say hello. And so welcome to the group and look forward to working with you all. And with that, unless anyone has anything for the good of the order, I will call this meeting adjourned. It is now 7:56 p.m. And if you can stay on the line until staff terminates the meeting. Thank you all.
Good night.
Right.